And hello, my fellow nerds. Welcome back once again to PokéMonth Special Countdown Series. So last time we finally finished off all the three most basic types in Pokemon: normal, fighting, and flying. And this time, I'm gonna be able to start off with some of the fun types, starting with the first one, the Grass type. Being one of the most iconic starting types, it's essential to have at least one Grass type on your team, even if you think you might not need it. And not to say that they tend to go with any starter Pokemon, as in, any standard fire, water, grass core tends to start off with a starter Pokemon, more 9 times out of 10. And I say 9 times because there's only 9 generations of grass type starter Pokemon. At least that's how much I can choose from. But don't worry, this whole list isn't going to be of just the grass starters, even though I like them so much. Besides, I already covered Chestnut in a previous video, and I don't want to repeat any Pokemon that I've already mentioned. So with that out of the way, I wanted to go over 10 of my absolute favorite grass type Pokemon. Especially since grass is one of my favorite types of all time, right next to my other favorite type, Ghost. But we're not going to touch Ghost typing for a long while. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get over the top 10 grass type starters that I personally like. Meganium. So you could say that I'm just rooting for the underdog here. Meganium has always been there and has always been the butt of every single joke that I've seen about it. About how it's just straight up outclassed by its fellow starters, Typhlosion and Feraligatr. Its stats and move pool aren't even that impressive either. Even though it got a Terra Raid event, I was actually able to solo its event pretty darn easily, unfortunately. And to be fair, I was kind of expecting a much bigger challenge than a Psychic Terra Meganium, which I literally took down with an Annihilate. It really wasn't that hard. God, jeez, my favorite starter gets mocked so badly, even its creators don't take it seriously. One day, Meganium, you will get your chance in the sunlight. But for me, when I was a kid, I took one look at Chikorita and said, if nobody else is gonna love you and care for you, then I will. Because, yeah, what was the surprise? How could it have been a surprise that I was one of the only kids that actually cared about Chikorita and its entire line? And yes, I would use it every single Johto playthrough that I did. I didn't really care much for Feraligatr or Typhlosion. I did use them a couple times, but I just prefer Meganium more often. Its whole thing is that it centralizes around teamwork. And yes, while it is weak to the first 2 gyms, which are Flying type and Bug type respectively, I don't know, I just kind of like Meganium the way it is. Its whole idea is teamwork, which is why it can learn moves like Reflect and Light Screen to help beef up your team. It also has support moves like Leech Seed and even some good set of attacks like Petal Blizzard and Giga Drain. And even though it does know a pretty good set of attacks, it's just better to use as a helpful support Pokemon like most grass types that you're probably going to see in this list anyways. But to me, I just wish Meganium had some form of buff in the future. Like maybe when Legend Z8 comes out, this Pokemon can actually get a Mega Evolution. Like, I don't know, Meganiumite just doesn't really sound like a cool item, I suppose, and it would sound confusing, especially if you confuse it with its name. And not to mention that Meganium is really not that bad of a starter Pokemon to have. Even though it probably can be beaten by quite a lot of Pokemon, like seriously, it is probably one of the only starter Pokemon that's in the ZU tier, or at the most, it's probably even in RU, which is rarely used. But I still would adore this thing, but its real shine usually came from whenever it appeared in the anime and in the new Pokemon Snap game for the Switch. Heck, they even use Meganium as a marketing tool for the Switch. Well, not for the Switch, but for Pokemon Snap Switch for the Switch. It just feels right, honestly, and I'm glad that they're taking a bit more care and kindness towards this giant green dinosaur of a Pokemon. But seriously, Game Freak, if you're watching this, please give Meganium a Mega Evolution. I would really be happy if you did that. Simisage. Okay, I know this might seem like a weird pick for a list like this, but please hear me out. I felt like I was the only kid that looked at this grass monkey and thought, yeah, seems like a cool Pokemon to have on my team. I'm gonna go ahead and use it. Until you look at this thing's capabilities. You mostly keep this thing as an unevolved Pansage for a long time until you use the good old Leaf Stone on it. And even then, its stats just... my god, what were they even thinking with this thing? It basically learns no moves via level up, leaving its move pool to just TMs and whatever it learned as a Pansage. Plus, while Simisage does have high speed and physical and special attack, being a pretty good mixed attacker, it suffers from the fact that it's very, very frail, as is the consequence with being a pure grass type. Most of the time. I'll get to that in a bit, but we have a couple of heavy hitters on the list. Just you wait. Couple that with the fact that Simisage is constantly ranked very low on Smogon tier lists. Seriously, this thing is ZU tier currently in the current anything goes metagame. And well, yeah, Simisage just can't catch a break. Even Smogon has some things to say about it. Being a pure grass type and having mediocre bulk to makes it difficult for Simisage to find opportunities to switch in. And it is weak to a bunch of revenge killers like Electrode and Electrode, which is a type that it's supposed to resist, but you know, explosion is a thing. And even Rapidash outspeeds this thing, and probably even revenge kills it fairly easily. Not to mention the fact that Simisage, well, not a lot of people tend to really like it. Heck, its brother Pokemon Pansear is one of the most disliked Pokemon in the entire world. But there's probably a reason why I do like the Elemental Monkeys, I kind of did see what they were trying to go for. And there's even a theory that the Elemental Monkeys were meant to be the starters of the Unova region before they got replaced by Tepig, Oshawott, and Snivy in their respective evolutionary lines. And not... though, you know, that's just ignoring the fact that Simisage is comedically always used to show as an example of why an offensive grass type doesn't really, even as a wall breaker, doesn't exactly work unless your name is superior. And even though that's true, I really did like this Pokemon. I adored this guy even when he only had like very minor appearances in the anime. I think one of his more major appearances is that he was owned by a guy called Angus. No, not that Angus, the other Angus. Thank you, editor. That's the correct one I was referring to. And seriously, this guy's hair literally matches Simisage for no reason. I guess if your hair matches a Pokemon, then that's the Pokemon that you're gonna use for the rest of your life. Honestly, I kind of feel bad for Angus considering he has a very terrible Pokemon in his team. But enough about that. I still appreciate this old guy no matter what. And hey, his TCG art is pretty amazing on any card that it's on. And from what I can find on Google, I've only been able to find like 4 Simisage cards in the entirety of the TCG. I don't know, maybe there's more that I'm just missing, but yeah, that's all I can find in my research. And even though it's always been made fun of, Simisage is just a Pokemon that I find really cool. And it was really cool for a time as being one of the only grass monkeys, until Pokemon mentioned and introduced about 4 more. Come on, man. Hashtag justice for Simisage. Meowscarada. Okay, the obvious pick is obvious, but can you blame me? Meowscarada took 2 of my favorite things and merged them together. Cats and the grass typing. What more could I ask for? In case you were wondering, yes, I too was also hoping that Sprigatito would stay on all 4s when it evolved into its fully evolved form, and I think it still could have worked. I see where they were going with the fans were going with it, is that it still could have kept the magician aspect while being on all 4s. But now that I think about it a bit more, it kind of makes sense. What kind of magician would do tricks on all 4s? It's better to be able to stand up and take a bow at the end of your performance. And yes, I was also part of the crowd that was disappointed that they saw Florigato was on its hind legs. But actually using it in its entire line in battle was admittedly kind of fun. I understand why they went in that direction anyways. And not to mention Meowscarada's signature move is my favorite signature move of all of them, Flower Trick. It's easily one of the best moves in the game. 70 base power and never misses and always results in a critical hit. That is super busted, but I love it at the same time. Speaking of which, I also love his design, basis being out of a feline magician. Honestly, it kind of, kind of reminds me of somebody. But even so, I really adore this thing. Did I mention that its signature move is completely busted? And that's not even getting into its competitive side. On the competitive side, it can even beat fellow Grass Starter Superior and even some Paradox Pokemon thanks to its base 123 speed stat and really high physical attack stat. It even gets triple axle for ice type coverage against flying and dragon types, stab, knockoff, and a pivot move in U-turn, and combine that with its hidden ability Protean, and you got a Pokemon that can do mostly anything. I mean, sure, it is 4 times weak to bug types, but let's be real here. Bug types are completely non-threatening. Unless its name is Galazapod, which, yeah, that's honestly completely scary. Or if it just happens to know to move first impression. But even so, let's face it, who's gonna use a bug type in competitive? Arguably the weakest type in the whole game. And honestly, after using Meowscarada in my playthrough team, yeah, I can see why it can be a competitive nuisance and a menace. But at the same time, I truly adore this thing. My starter Pokemon in Scarlet and Violet was immediately picked as the grass type because I always thought Sprigatito was kind of adorable when I first saw it. It's a cute little weed cat, and I think that's really adorable. And yeah, I do like the inspiration that they also got from Florigato, being based on the one and only Puss in Boots, which is kind of surprising because that we didn't have one for the past 8 generations since Pokemon started. I'm honestly very surprised that we don't have any more Pokemon that's like that, based on fairy tales and all that. And it also kind of surprised me that since Florigato is based on a fairy tale, I'm surprised that they're not grass fairy types. Which, wait, did we ever have a grass fairy type? I'd be surprised if we didn't. But yeah, I like this thing. Meowscarada has an incredible design, amazing competitive stance, and it just looks really cool. I wouldn't mind having this thing as my sync pair partner if I was in Pokemon Masters or something. Scovillain, the first ever fire grass starter that really genuinely surprised all of us, especially since it was the only Pokemon with that unique typing. Until Ogerpon showed up with the Heartflame mask and said, "Here, let me do one better." Scovillain was the kind of Pokemon that fans have wanted for a long time. A grass type that is also a fire type. We have a water fire type in Volcanion, a water grass type in Ludicolo, and we finally got our grass fire typing in Scovillain. It even came with its own signature move, Spicy Extract, which raises the target's attack by 2 stages, but lowers the opponent's defense by 2 stages. And definitively, this would be basically a risk versus reward type of move. Like, yeah, you just increased their physical attack, but your attacks hit much harder now as a result. And I can totally see this in some sort of application in a double battle. Imagine this, if you will. You use Spicy Extract on your partner Pokemon, whatever it is, right? And their attack gets raised, but their defense gets lowered. All of a sudden, your partner Pokemon has the White Herb activate, which returns their normal defensive stats back to them, and in turn then use Iron Defense right after, meaning that partner Pokemon now has +2 attack and +2 physical defense. Well, while that can be useful in that very, very specific situation, I'm not really sure how else you're supposed to use this move. most people tend to look at signature moves and only see their power and what they do and just either ignore them or think that they're the most broken thing on the planet, i.e. with Meowscarada and Flower Trick. But with Scovillain, it's a slightly different story. I feel like Scovillain will make a very big impact in doubles when it comes to that very specific instance that I mentioned. And not to mention the fact that it's a really clever design being based on on specific types of peppers, and I think I know what kind of pepper it is. I think it's a habanero or jalapeno, I think. I'm assuming it's jalapeno because Spicy Extract's Japanese name is habanero extract, which really goes to show what kind of peppers they're using, or probably even feeding this guy. Not to mention its dex entries kind of support the theory on how the green head is the one that does the grass type attacks, while the red head is the one that does the fire type attacks. It simply just works in that regard, especially. And hey, I even like their shiny form. It kind of, and no, I don't think my editing self even thought about putting the shiny form in here at all. But I just want to let you all know that the shiny form looks really sick. Yeah, aside from that, I think Scovillain would be a pretty big player in was actually a big hold up. As I was trying to say, Scovillain was basically a big player in my first playthrough Team Blue Scarlet, and I pretty much appreciated it ever since, even since I caught it as a little Capsate kid. I wasn't really expecting this thing to be a very big power player, living hits at like 1 HP somehow. I have no idea why I'm so lucky in these games. But yeah, on to the next entry. Delmise. If any of you know me well, I love the grass and ghost type Pokemon. So when Decidueye and Delmise were introduced in the same generation, you can tell I was pretty hyped for them. I do love Decidueye, don't get me wrong, it's one of my favorite starters of all time just because it's a grass and ghost type. But I've always had a bit of a soft spot for Delmise. Spooky season might be over, but I can't help but talk about one creepy Pokemon per list. Even though its whole body is an anchor, the Pokedex implies that isn't its true body, and that the Pokemon itself is actually the seaweed that's controlling the anchor, which I think is actually a pretty interesting design choice, especially since it's ghost type. It makes it think, what the heck is possessing the seaweed to cause it to take over an anchor? I don't know, food for thought. And it even comes with its own signature move, an Anchor Shot, which despite that move actually just being Steel type and Delmise not getting real stab from it, it actually still does get stab from it, thanks to its ability Steel Worker, which boosts the power of Steel type moves, essentially making Delmise a grass, ghost, and Steel type. Oh, and fun fact about its typing, the English subbed version of the Japanese anime mistook Delmise as a water and ghost type instead of a grass and ghost type. Yes, that actually did happen in the anime. We just didn't see it because they actually translated it correctly in English, while in Japanese there was a mistake. Anyways, Delmise itself can actually be a pretty big menace in the right circumstances of battle. It even gains access to some decent moves like Power Whip and Shadow Ball, and while its physical attack is higher, it does have potential to be a pretty devious mix attacker, with the right natures and all that. Its only problem is that it has a base speed set at 40, making it one of the slowest Pokemon to hit the field, one of the slower Pokemon to hit the field, compared to most others, but to make up for that, it actually has some pretty decent bulk, meaning it can keep itself alive for a good while, while also doing in plenty of damage to the enemy team. And my goodness, that having that Steel Worker ability is very helpful against Fairy types. Trust me, you'd not believe how much you actually value a Steel or a Poison type if your opponent has a Fairy type. And even though I would still use Decidueye at the end of the day, knowing that it's just better in any other way, Delmise can rest easy knowing that it has my attention and my heart for being just one of the best type combos that I've ever seen in any Pokemon game. Seriously, we need more ghost and grass types. There are really, really few of them. The only ones I can think of are Delamize, Decidueye, Trevenant, Phantom, Gorgeist, and Pumpkaboo, just to name a few of them. So, and also here's a question for you guys: who's your favorite grass type that's on this list? Or if they're not on this list, leave a comment down below. I'd really like to know. Awesome. Going into Gen 2 for the first time, I noticed this little Pokemon just sort of existing in the anime, and I think the only time I ever saw this thing in the anime was probably during one the Blossom the episode where I actually include Blossom, or two, the Pikachu Rescue Adventure special that happened before the second movie. And when I was going into Gen 2, I was kind of wondering what kind of Pokemon Blossom would actually be. It seemed like it could be a pretty cool standalone Pokemon, but surprisingly, it was actually a branch evolution for Gloom, of all things, to which many people say didn't really make a whole lot of sense, considering that Gloom is a grass poison type and Blossom is a pure grass type. And that made people question, why would you want to evolve your Gloom and lose one of your main stab typings? You know, grass and poison, which is actually pretty good in most circumstances, and especially if your name is Venusaur. Well, there's actually probably a net plus about this. For one, losing that poison typing actually makes it not weak to psychic types anymore. So, and it even has some pretty decent bulk to keep itself alive, while also being able to learn the move Synthesis. At least I'm 70% sure this thing learns Synthesis. I don't know, I might have to look at its level up moveset again. Or, you know, lack of a level up moveset, because I don't even remember if it does learn moves from level up, because this is a stone evolution, and everyone knows that stone evolutions don't typically learn any more moves after they evolve, like what Pan said earlier. And honestly, getting rid of its psychic weakness in favor of a different different stats and spread and a different move pool is a pretty big benefit for it, considering that it also gains access to Quiver Dance. And if you guys know anything about Quiver Dance, you would know that any Pokemon that has both of its special stats raised and its speed raised is very scary, especially if your Pokemon aren't really well suited to deal with special attackers. And seeing the Blossom Dance for the first time in the Pokemon special was something pretty special to me as a kid. Even now, I still appreciate it. And if you're wondering, yes, I still have the old school VHS that came with this, that has the second movie in it and came with that special that just happens to be on the tape at the same time. Blossom, again, like I said before, is a bit of an oddball in battle. Most of its competitive advice from Smogon just sort of states on how it's completely outclassed by Gen 5's Lilligant in every single way. But I remain astute to my belief that any Pokemon can do a proper sweep with the proper setup, even if they are in ZU tier. One day, Blossom, you might just get a chance to shine. Profile. So, my love for this Pokemon is justified by quite a few factors. First of all, I loved this Pokemon in the anime. Ash Deceptile had great personality even before it evolved, and as a Grovyle, it was a major player in most of the battles it was in. It always had this cool and methodical way of battling, and it just looked so awesome. The other probably more expected reason for all of you is that I have a very special attachment to the Grovyle from Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Explorers of Sky, where it tried to go back in time in order to retrieve the time gears and fix the disastrous future that he comes from. Oh, and not to mention, you know, the fact that this Pokemon in the Pokemon Mystery Dungeon animated special was actually voiced by Dan Green himself. You know, the same person who voices Yugi in Yu-Gi-Oh! Okay, well, maybe not the base Yugi, but you know, the Pharaoh Yugi, the one that comes out of the little pyramid, frickin' Millennium puzzle that's around his neck. Yeah. Same person, which is actually very surprising, and I honestly didn't know until I watched the special. I'm thinking, is that Dan Green? Like, that's his voice and everything. But yeah, I always like Grovyle a bit more than its evolved form and pre-evolution, but I still appreciate the line as a whole. In general, Grovyle gets a lot of love from the fans, and I won't lie, I kind of wish that Ash had just kept it as a Grovyle. But even after evolved, it still kicked major butt. Being one of his only Pokemon the only Pokemon that KO Tobias's Darkrai with a single Leaf Blade. Even though Heracross had more of an advantage against Darkrai being a bug and fighting type. Some things in the anime just never change, do they? And honestly, Grovyle's stats are actually pretty good for a middle evolved Pokemon. When you have it at that time during the game. Being a fast attacker and having a good move pool. In the end, I'll always appreciate this Pokemon for how it is, whether it's evolved or not. Leafeon, one of my all-time favorite evolutions, and yes, I like Leafeon more than any other evolution. You can disagree with me in the comments if you want. Comments are just good for the algorithm anyways. Anyway, Leafeon is a Pokemon that I am surprised that many don't really talk about as much as others. Despite being a pure grass type, it's actually not that bad of a Pokemon to use. An evolution is practically a requirement for any good playthrough team, or even a competitive team for that matter. And I think Leafeon really does its job well. Even though it's a grass type, it has a base physical defense stat of 130. So any of you who are unaware of why it's 130 despite being a grass type, the evolutions have this whole gimmick where each one has a certain stat that they excel in. With Flareon is attack, Vaporeon is HP, Jolteon is speed, Espeon special attack, Umbreon special defense. With Leafeon, it's just physical defense, being the physically more bulky of all of them, only pretty much being balanced out by its base 65 HP stat, which isn't that great, but the physical bulk pretty much makes up for that fact. And aside from that, it can also hit pretty decently hard as well, and provide supports in any team it's on. Seriously, this thing can learn both Leech Seed and Swords Dance, both of which are very good moves to have. Combine that with a Baton Pass, and you can pretty much sweep any team guaranteed with the help of a Leafeon assist. And not to mention, it can even learn Synthesis and keep itself alive just by healing itself. Sometimes it doesn't even need to switch out. It can switch out with Baton Pass, it can just sweep the enemy team by itself, which in and of itself is very threatening compared to any other evolution that you might see. And sure, other ones like Leafeon, Flareon, and any other ones like Flareon, Vaporeon, heck, even Espeon and Umbreon could sweep teams if given the right circumstances, but Leafeon is the more straightforward one. It just has high attack and very high physical defense, while also being incredibly fast, and it even hits hard. And again, a moveset like Swords Dance, Leech Seed, Leaf Blade, and Baton Pass could really ruin somebody's day if they don't know what to expect. And Leafeon is one of those evolutions that's actually very consistent among other generations, being one of the only few evolutions that is consistently really good and competitive, even through immense power creep. We've seen it enter the ZU tier multiple times, and even now it's probably still in ZU. But even so, I still love this Pokemon, and I would still give this little guy a chance on my team. Especially the reason why I like it so much is because back in Gen 4, its debut generation, it had a very auspicious stat distribution and unresisted coverage against everything, making it a very difficult Pokemon for some teams to handle. And once again, that aspect continued to grow over time, even with the immense power creep. Leafeon, you basically just are one of the best evolutions. In fact, no, you are the best evolution. You deserve the crown of all time. Seriously, why aren't more people talking about this thing? It essentially is one of the best Pokemon to use, and I will stand and die on this hill for it. Venusaur. Yet another Kanto Pokemon makes another list, and this is for actually good reason. Venusaur has been consistently good ever since its debut generation, but it's not just the competitive side of it that I really like. Even though, it's grass poison type and therefore is weak to psychic, which is, I guess, technically the second best typing in the entire game, unless we're talking about steel types, but that's for a completely different video. The point as to why I like Venusaur so much is because it was, once again, much like Meganium, that one Pokemon that nobody would ever take. Trust me, I've seen a lot of people take either Charmander or Squirtle along with them, even though Venusaur here is literally the best equipped starter for any Kanto playthrough. And also, making sure your rival can't use Sleep Powder or any other powder moves is a big plus and benefit. But enough of my own griping, back to why I like Venusaur. Its design-wise is just really freaking cool. And once I first saw it in the anime, I couldn't get enough of it. This little giant frog dinosaur plant monstrosity was something that I genuinely enjoyed. Even though Charizard is technically Game Freak's little baby boy that gets everything first, Venusaur and Blastoise pretty much get everything a bit better. Heck, Venusaur's Mega Evolution and Gigantamax forms are two of the main reasons why I like this thing so much. It actually gets special attention, mostly because it is a starter, and it's from the first generation. And sure, you could say the same thing about Charizard and Blastoise, but I tend to think that people like those two more than Venusaur. And especially when it comes to people like the people from Death Battle, considering that Venusaur lost its own Death Battle against its fellow two starters. Not to mention that its own move pool is actually not too bad, having access to critical hit Razor Leaf, Synthesis for self-healings, and even later on it gets Sludge Bomb for even more poison type coverage. And when the Fairy type was introduced, Venusaur just got more powerful, considering that Fairy was weak to one of its stab typings. Poison. So honestly, throw a bone to Venusaur because he's just that good, that powerful, and when used correctly, it's just a very, very good cornerstone for any team. And believe me when I say, you'd want to have a Venusaur on your team. Because when I look at it, the more I look at its stats and move pool abilities and everything else, it's just that cool. Honestly, it makes me disappointed that Ash never evolved his Bulbasaur in the anime, and besides, and now that I think about it, it could have just told Bulbasaur to evolve, and Bulbasaur would have to listen. Which honestly made me realize how much of a jerk Bulbasaur was in its own Star episode where it was supposed to evolve. I don't even know why the writers chose to not evolve it. Like, seriously, I understand that the whole show's premise is to reach your best potential and be the best that you can be, which Venusaur definitely is, but why keep it as a Bulbasaur? I understand that most people would like to point out that the fact that the reason why it didn't become an Ivysaur than a Venusaur was because it saw what Charmander went through when it evolved into Charmeleon and Charizard, where it slowly started to disobey Ash every single second. And, often take naps on the battlefield, so he didn't really want to be like that. Honestly, I just think Bulbasaur was just being stubborn. Like, no, mate. Sure, you'll still be number one in the Pokédex, but, you're still not going to be number one Pokemon. That's always going to be Pikachu. We all know that for a fact. But yeah, aside from that, I honestly love this thing. Venusaur definitely deserves a bit more attention, and I really wish Ash could have just evolved his Bulbasaur to let it be stronger than his own actual team. Anyways, moving on to number 1. And my number 1 favorite grass-type Pokemon of all time is Celebi. Yeah, I know, this is probably a pretty obvious pick, but can you blame me? The first time I saw Celebi, I always thought it was a pretty cute Pokemon. But I didn't know for a fact that it was going to be a mythical Pokemon. And I also have a bit of a theory is that if the fairy type had existed before Generation 3, in Generation 2, like before Gen 3 and Gen 6, I'm willing to suspect that Celebi could have been a grass and fairy type, making it the first grass fairy type to ever exist. At least I think so. Again, I don't remember if we have any other grass fairy types. But looking back on it, Celebi is just one of those Pokemon that I barely adore quite a lot, especially since it had its own movie, Pokemon Forever, and you know, it appeared in quite a lot of material. It was a Pokemon in Smash for a good amount of time, it had its own movie. I think it even had its own anime episode at one point. But aside from that, I just really adore this thing. And I think it may also be for the same reasons why I like Grovyle, mostly because of Pokemon Mystery Dungeon, where you get to meet Celebi, and ironically, it's a shiny Celebi for some apparent reason. I'm honestly not really sure what caused Celebi to turn shiny during that storyline, but you know, the fact that this Pokemon also appears only during good times is just one of those things I really adore about it. And you know, being the second mythical Pokemon, this is actually one that more people actually kind of had a feeling and know about now, especially since back in Generation 1, Mew was the only mythical Pokemon, and it was secretly programmed into the game, which is why it sealed itself as a mythical Pokemon. It's proved its status. Celebi, on the other hand, is just a mythical Pokemon off the bat, and we all knew about it. But though the reason why we didn't get a Celebi event back then was because they thought that the event would be a bit too convoluted, and the GS ball was basically never used in the anime at all. Oh wait, what? You don't remember the GS ball? It did appear in the anime, and it took us many years for us to finally get Celebi via the virtual console version of Pokemon Crystal. To which, honestly, I don't know why they waited so long to do that. The event itself isn't that convoluted. Like, seriously, it's not as convoluted as having the Azure Flute, going to the Hall of Origin, playing the Azure Flute, and being able to find Arceus, the creator of all Pokemon. But aside from Celebi's adorableness and actual tie to the lore of Pokemon, I'm willing to say that it's actually a pretty good Pokemon to use in battle too. It gets things like Heal Bell, Leech Seed, a few good Grass and Psychic moves, and it's even a pretty viable threat in any sort of VGC. But you know, nowadays, since VGC has actually banned legendaries, people have to get a bit more creative with how they handle things. And honestly, I wouldn't have minded if they allowed legendaries into the competitive format again. Celebi is just one of my favorite mythicals of all time, right next to a different mythical, but I'll talk about that one a bit later. But, you know, it's just because Celebi works, in my opinion. I just love this thing. I want more of this thing, and I just wish it was more of a common Pokemon rather than a mythical Pokemon, because I would love to have an army of Celebi. And honestly, I think that's even canon to Pokemon, because in Celebi's movie, I think it's Pokemon Forever, or it's the one with Celebi in it. I don't remember which one it was. But during that movie, we actually get to see a whole bunch of Celebi just appear. And yes, I am quite aware that theories state that they're all the same Celebi, similarly to how every single Link is the same guy, just reincarnated. It's the same spirit, just reincarnated. Or how Ganondorf is the same person that just comes back to life over and over again. And I would definitely want Celebi on my team no matter what. And hopefully in Pokemon Legends ZA, we might get to see a bit more about Celebi and his origins. Or, you know, they could just go the obvious direction and just talk about Zygarde the entire time. But, you know, who knows? And with that out of the way, I believe that's it for the video. Thank you guys so much for watching my top 10 grass types, and I'll see you next time when we talk about the next special typing, Fire.
You say you wanna try, but you never do. Sugar, there's a reason.